welcome to Ask the Lady Electrical Inspector podcast. I am your host, Tabatha L. Tonight, I would like to give you some information on ceiling covers for electrical inspections. These are issues that I have frequently on my ceiling inspections, so I just want to give you some pointers to let you know of some of the issues that I have regularly. So I'll get right into it because I have a lot to discuss tonight. And the first thing I wanted to discuss would be acoustic ceiling panels. Acoustic ceiling panels are sound or absorbing panels used to reduce sound and block sound from traveling to adjacent rooms. Acoustic ceiling panels are decorative in many different types and styles. The most common types that I have problems with are the wood slate panels. They come in different sizes and widths. So you can have them in a 2x10, a 4x10. The problem that I've had with these ceiling tiles, the acoustic, would be the wood type acoustic ceiling pads, tiles. The access panels are required for any electrical equipment that requires servicing. So access panels must be framed before the inspection. So the problem that I have with these type of ceilings, as I mentioned, is the size. You have the 2x10, the 4x10. So there's a special tool that's required to remove the ceiling tile, the ceiling slate, if you ever need to service that equipment. So the problem being there is that the special tool that you need to access and remove the ceiling, the equipment above the ceiling is not rendered readily accessible. So readily accessible means it can be quickly reached without climbing over any obstacles. So if you have to require a special tool to gain access to it, then it's not considered readily accessible. In this instance, with the acoustic ceiling panels, the wood slate type, above those ceilings are electrical equipment. So you have HVA equipment, you have VAV boxes, junction boxes, condensing pumps, smoke detectors, fire damper, fire actuators, fittings such as LBs, LRs, just to name a few, grounding electrodes attached to building steel. You have disconnect speakers, you have disconnect switches, speakers, and white noise. So you just have a variety of electrical equipment above these ceilings. So as I mentioned, the problem being that some electrical equipment must be readily accessible. And I gave you the definition for that. So it has to be quickly reached without using a tool. So with that being said, to name a few of those would be disconnects, like disconnect switches. They would be installed above the ceiling for HVAC systems, and then you have hot water tanks that have disconnect switches above these ceilings. So these are things that need to be readily accessible without having to get up there and take it down and just take time to get to it. So access panels are required. And in most cases with these type of ceilings, they do not want to cut that ceiling because it's a decorative type of ceiling and they're going for a certain look. But the minimum requirement of the code must be met when you install these type of ceilings because that electrical equipment above that ceiling, it has to be serviced at some point in time. So that's something that needs to be taken into consideration. Also, with that being said, when you have to have an access panel, depending on how high in the ceiling that equipment is up there, you would have to have a way to get there. So I've had some ceilings that from the ceiling grid, you could go anywhere from 10 feet to 15 feet. So now you need a special ladder or a one-man lift or something to be able to get up there that high to get to that ceiling. So the average size access panel that I've seen cut out is maybe a 2x2 or 2x4 to get in there, but you have to take that in consideration if you have to go that high to the ceiling. So those are things that need to be taken in consideration when you're designing these ceilings to allow access above the ceilings. Also, with that being said, the location. Those ceilings are allowed, but you do have to have the access panels, and what I said was that you need to they need to be identified. Like if you have a disconnect switch above there for HVAC equipment, that needs to be located. Now, how do you identify where that is? So there's different methods with identifying where the locations are. So one way, on a couple jobs that I've had, they use dots just to blend in with the ceiling. So if you can use some type of dot or use some type of label to mark to tell the maintenance personnel or the service person that has to come in and do a service call where that's located, because it has to be identified. And it has to have quick access with a cut-out panel, an access panel. So those are things that you need to take in consideration when you are using this type of ceiling. Another problem with this type of ceiling is cove lighting. So the cove lighting, as you know, is the type of lighting that sits around the edge of the ceiling, and it accentuates the ceiling, and you want it to light up. Issue with it being such a small compartment is that you really don't have enough space to get to the drivers or the electrical components. So that's an issue where those type of things have to have access. You have to be able to service anything that has electrical connections, anything that components, any electrical splices. That's just a minimum requirement of the National Electrical Code, that you have to have access to electrical wiring after the installation. Another issue that I've had with these are fire dampers in the locations. So keep that in mind when you're setting the fire dampers or the actuators, not to block yourself into a dry wall and have that fire actuator, the connection point, facing the drywall, because it's not accessible. Now you have to make two access panels. You have to cut an access panel out above that location to get actually to that fire damper. And then if it's located against a wall, you have to cut another access panel out on the other side of the wall to get to that. So that's two access panels. So don't block yourself in on that type of situation. So we're talking about ceiling covers. And while we're talking about that, I just wanted to talk about the fire caulking. So on these larger projects, like the commercial projects, with the fire caulking, you have so many fire penetrations that the general contractor, they normally will hire a professional company to fire caulk the penetrations. So by the time the ceiling cover is called in, all of the fire caulking work must be completed. I mention that because when I come on jobs, sometimes we're getting to the end of the job, a little bit when we're coming to the ceiling cover, and now we're in a push situation where everything must get covered. The problem being is when I get there, you still have fire walls and fire ceilings and floor holes that are not fireproof. So if I have to sign off on that, I want to make sure that it's done and that it doesn't get forgotten, that it doesn't get forgotten, and that it's fire caulked. So make sure that's done before you call in for a ceiling cover. And where you can find that in the code book would be Article 300.21. I'll move on with seismic requirements for the jobs. So the seismic requirements for any electrical job, you have to have that you install on these jobs, such as generators and pipe racks and transformers, all of the big heavy equipment. You must have a permit for fire pumps, all of these special item equipment, and they need to be seismic. Those seismic requirements can be found in the local jurisdiction. And if you have these, if you need the requirements, just email me. I'll give you those requirements. I'll send them to you through email, only if you're in my jurisdiction. And I can verify if you're in that jurisdiction with, in my jurisdiction, if with your license number, if you need those requirements. So the seismic requirements for heavy conduit racks, bus duct transformers in the ceilings. So before you get a ceiling cover, the seismic requirements must be signed and approved. They should be on the job. We need to know the spacing of the seismic. We need to know how far apart the seismic, what materials you're going to use to do the seismic above the ceilings. So those are things we need to do on the ceiling cover. Emergency lights. Emergency lights and light fixed exit lights, they require seismic because it's a part of the emergency system. So you want that to stay with the grid. If anything ever happens, that's a part of the emergency system where you want the exit light to help guide you out of that space if you ever had an emergency. So that's a requirement. Just a pencil rod down one would suffice with an exit light, or you can have threaded rod. That's something that you can use as well. Lay-in fixtures. This is a question I get a lot. I get asked this a lot because in the National Electrical Code, it tells you that you have to have you have to be positively attached to the ceiling grid. Attachment capable of carrying 100% of the weight of the fixture in any direction. This attachment shall consist of, this right here is the seismic requirement of the jurisdiction. So in the code, it tells you that you need to be securely fastened to the ceiling framing members by mechanical means, such as bolts, rivet, and clips. So the seismic with the 4 points of attachment, that's the question I get asked a lot, because the electrician want to know, where are you pulling that from? Where is that information coming from? So that's where it's coming from. It's coming from the seismic requirements that's in the jurisdiction. So that's what it tells you, that what I was stating earlier, I got ahead of myself, I'm sorry, that you have to have the 4 points. And this is done when the fixtures are new or replaced. Light fixture must be positively attached to the grid with an attachment capable of carrying 100% of the weight of the fixture acting in any direction. This attachment shall consist of 4 equally spaced attachment points using the screws, rivet, bolts, and also the clips. Those are the ones that you're using for the flat LED lights now that you don't have the wings to actually tech screw to the grid. So that's where that requirement comes in at. Now, in my jurisdiction alone, I know for a fact that that's a requirement for the light fixture to have seismic cables, regardless of the weight of the light. Jurisdiction I'm in, you have to have the seismic pencil rod as well as the 4 points of attachment to when you're doing new construction or if you're replacing the lights. So that is a requirement. Another thing that I have issue with would be MC supported by the ceiling wires. Those cables, they must be identified. And how we identify it in the trade, this is something that's regular. You do it with paint. You can paint it, or you can have a rod wire supporting clip. Another name is a breakaway clip, is what we call it in this region. And this ceiling wire must be secured at both ends. Because I've had that on several occasions. I would come to the job. The wire, the ceiling wire, is attached to the grid, the pan deck, where they have it riveted up in the pan deck, but it's not attached to the grid. So it has to be attached at both ends. So make sure that's done. I just saw that on a job today where they just had it attached to the ceiling and folded up and had the Batman clip attaching the MC cable. That's not allowed. It just needed to be supported on both ends. Okay, along with that MC cable, the MC cable cannot touch the grid because the MC cable is not bonded or grounded to the electrical grounding system. So just look at it this way. If the grid becomes energized, like if the MC cable becomes energized, the grid is going to become energized. And where does it go? It doesn't have anywhere to go, so it will take the least path of resistance and could possibly cause bodily harm or equipment damage. So remember, the MC cable cannot touch the grid. I see a lot of that on the jobs. And you got to remember the weight of the grid. If you had MC cables just hanging on the grid, you're putting extra weight on the grid as well. That's why they want you to have independent support cables to support the cables. Another thing, now this is coming directly from the fire marshal because I've had several conversations with him. And the fire marshal says that you absolutely cannot have nothing resting on the fire sprinkling system. So that's the MC, that's low voltage cable. They don't want anything to interfere with the fire sprinkler equipment because it's a life safety system. So nothing can rest on that sprinkler pipe, absolutely nothing. So with this, I want to go back a little bit because I should have mentioned this early on with the acoustic ceiling. The acoustic ceiling, another issue with the acoustic ceiling is when you have a pendant light that drops down in between the wood slate, and then you would have a canopy, electrical canopy, and it's sandwiched between the ceiling grid and the wood ceiling. That's a problem because now you don't have any access. You have sandwiched that together, and there's no way to remove that without taking down the entire ceiling grid. So you need access to any junction box. So that's the issue that I've had on several jobs where, depending on the type of light fixture, and most of the ones that I've had issues with are pendant light fixtures. So just remember that when you have that canopy is decorative to hide the connections inside. You can't sandwich it between the wood slate and the ceiling grid. That's not allowed. Keeping on track with the pendant lights and the exit lights. Here's something when you're doing a ceiling cover or when you're doing ceiling installation. If you have a pendant light or if you have an exit light, you cannot support it with a single raceway. And if you do, the raceway must be threaded. It could be IMC, intermediate metal conduit. It can be RMC, rigid metal conduit. Or it can be a listed identified hub. Now, you can also support the box with threaded rod. That's a choice as well. But just keep in mind, the reason you just can't, the problem being, you can't support it with a compression connector because it's not threaded. And that compression connector may have like maybe 3 threads, but eventually through vibration, that will become loosened and it could possibly fall out of the ceiling. So Remember that if you're going to have a pendant light that's supported by a raceway, it has to be a threaded raceway, and it has to be a threaded raceway or a listed identified hub. We're going to keep going with cord-connected luminaires. The number one problem that I have with these, or the problems with the cord, is that the cord must be located directly below the outlet being the lighting outlet, the luminaire. Now, I would give you no more than 3 inches, no more, but it has to be directly below. You can't run it 6 inches over, 12 inches over. That's the code. It says that it must be supported requirements. You can find these requirements in 410.62. And those requirements state that it has to be below the outlet. The flexible cord must be visible the entire length of the run. I've had that several times, because most of the times if you're in a ceiling and you're using these type of cord connected luminaires, you're going to be running on strut. So where do you support the cord? So most of the time the electricians, they'll have the cord supported against the strut, and then they'll duck into the strut and try to support it and come out. That's the problem. The problem being it has to be visible the entire length, because we want to see the cord. I want to see it on inspection because the code tells me to, but the maintenance person would want to see it just in case if you had any cracks or anything that's going to go wrong with that cord, it's visible and you can actually see it because it's flexible cord. So it doesn't have a longevity. So that's something that needs to be taken in consideration when you're running cord attached fixtures, and it not subject to strain or damage. So that's one of the requirements as well. Terminated in a grounding type attachment plug. So that means that it has to be either terminated in a canopy for the strain relief, or you can have a receptacle, and it has to be that's the attachment plug that they're talking about. So that article is 410.62C. And for those pendant light and the exit lights with the single raceway, that article is 314.23E. And here is another huge problem that we have, not only in my area, but this is something that's just one of these things that people like what they like. 3-inch can lights or less. So if you have 3-inch can lights, the issue with these can lights, now they 3 inches or less, so they can go all the way down to 1. I've seen that. And when you get down to 1, you just got a puck light. And it's really a decorative type of light, but people like what they like. And the problem being that you have drivers, and depending on how the can light is designed, you have connections that you have to get to. So most can lights, if their issue is because they're in a drywall ceiling, and most of the time, the designer do not want you to cut access panels in the drywall because it takes away from the look they're trying to create. But they like the 3-inch can lights or 2-inch can lights. This is something that they like, but that's an issue because the opening is so small that everything you have to do with one hand. So if after the finished product, you have to go in there and you have to service the driver, now you have to use one hand. You got to get in there. You got to take it apart. You got to take the driver out. You got to take the connections apart. You got to put it back, all with one hand. So that's something to consider. It can be done in some applications because now the manufacturers, they're getting wind to this is a huge problem, and they're making it one piece. And that's okay if all of the connections, the driver, everything comes out when you snap it down. But if you have to go in there and fish around, that's something you wouldn't want to do, because it is difficult, because I've witnessed electricians trying to service that to get the inspections passed. Not a pretty sight when your hand come out of there. So just keep that in mind, because this has been a policy. This issue has been around since 2016. This is when a policy was issued in my jurisdiction. So just take heed to that issue with the can lights. So remember, I said that you have to take it apart, you have to put it back, and all of that must be done with filling around. No visual contact can be made. I told you about the problem with the branch circuit wiring to the luminaires. It must be accessible for inspection as well. So you can find that article in 410.6 of the National Electrical Code, because it should be a listed product and it has to be accessible. So the can light drivers, this is an issue with can lights that are installed in drywall ceilings and some suspended ceilings. It just depends on the manufacturer and the type of can light. So if you have a can light that has a frame, when we come out to do the inspection, sometimes the contractor will just have whips, and what we call whips are the MC whips. They'll just be inside of the frame with they're not installed in the junction box. That's not a ceiling cover, because if we come out to do a ceiling cover, all of the ceiling work must be completed. So if you call us out to do a ceiling cover, please have the MC whips installed in the junction boxes and have the frames installed. So that's something that needs to be taken into consideration when you're calling in the inspections. Have your frame for your can light available and installed, and have the whips in the junction boxes, because if they're not, it's not a complete ceiling cover. So I said that because there are so many different types of can lights that you can purchase. I'm not an estimator. I do not know the different types. I only know what I see in the field. And there are types that do have one piece where you can assemble and do all of what you need to do by pulling it down. So just do the research and figure out what you need for that job. And I know a lot of the jobs that new construction, you really don't know what's there because it's brand new. But a lot of the remodel or alteration jobs or interior finish, you can actually get out there and see if you have beams in the way or ductwork in the way, and see what you have on site before you order these components to help the technicians and electricians out, because a lot of times they have to install this stuff on the fly. And so that's just something to consider and research before you actually order the can lights. Here's one that I'm having an issue with on the job as we speak. Now, I mentioned the can lights. And you can do a lot of things with these can lights with the different patterns and the schemes. There's a lot of things you can do. So one of the questions that came to me is that because we're in a drywall ceiling, the electrician, he wants to know, can you mount the driver's remote? Well, the drivers for the can lights allowed to be mount remote. So that comes down to the installation instructions. The installation instructions will provide specific guidelines to tell you how to install their product. So if the manufacturer tells you you can do it, and they give you guidelines and they give you rules and they tell you what to do, what wire size to use, and I come on that project and you give me the manufacturer's instruction, and now when you give me the manufacturer's instructions, don't give me 30 pages. Give me what I need for that moment, because I need to see what I need to see at that moment to pass that inspection. I don't have time to go through 30 pages. Give me the page that I need, and if it says that it can be mounted remotely, you're allowed to do that. But I haven't had too many of those instructions provided for me. So the bottom line, if the manufacturer says you can do it, you're allowed to do it. Now, we're talking about can lights. So remodel can lights. That's been a question. Can we use remodel can lights in new construction? The key word is remodel. So remodel housings are designed to work with existing ceilings and don't require a mounting frame. That answers your question, because if it's remodel and it's new construction, you can't. So when I come to do a ceiling cover, I'm looking above the ceiling. I'm coming to do an inspection to make sure that everything that's electrical, and on the larger projects, you have several different electrical contractors on those projects. You could have 5 different electrical contractors doing 5 different things. So when I'm there for a specific contractor. Now, I would like for you all to get together, and if it's possible, and sometimes it's not, call the inspection in at one time. Like if you know we're going to do a large area and it needs to be done, everybody has to call that inspection in before that ceiling gets covered. So if you can get together and call it in for one inspection, that would help out everyone. So that's something that I would like you to take into consideration when you're calling in these inspections, because all the junction box covers and all the VAV box covers must be covered before the ceiling can be covered. So if I'm there for a power inspection and I'm doing electrical power, and then I see a VAV cover off, and I ask the electrician, whose cover is that? And then he tells me a different contractor. Now I got to go track that contractor down, or tell the electrician to tell the general contractor to have that contractor call it in. And then most of the time, they're not ready. And that's okay too. But if you're not ready, you're not ready. But if you coordinate, that's what project management is. We can just have a more successful completion of this project and not hold anyone up. I spoke about HVAC equipment earlier. A problem that I have had on several projects. HVAC equipment with flexible cord above a suspended ceiling. It comes out like that. That's what the electrician says. And when I get up there and I look at it and it's hermetically sealed, they're right. It came out from the factory like that. But the problem, flexible cord, isn't allowed to be installed above a suspended ceiling. So that's Article 400.8. And that's the problem, because they're correct. It came out from the factory like that. It is hermetically sealed. They can't get in there and change it out. It will void the warranty on that equipment. But something that I've learned through the process of doing these inspections is that you have to go back to the manufacturer, and they have accessories, or they can get you a piece of equipment, or that certain piece of equipment. They can get it out there without a flexible cord being installed, because the electrician, they can't go in there and they can't touch anything that's factory sealed. So keep that in mind when you're doing HVAC equipment with flexible cord. Flexible cord is not allowed to be installed above a suspended ceiling. I have that a lot. Nylon string, that's another one. So when you're pulling your low voltage cable, your fire alarm, data, security, speakers, all your low voltage equipment, and we all know when the owners and different people walk through the building. They get in there, they see the layout. It doesn't look the same as it looked on that piece of paper. Now they want to change things. So this is the reason why most of the low voltage contractors will leave the nylon string in the ceiling. And I get it, because once you pull it out, now you got to go back up there with a glow stick, fish it through the J hooks or the bridle rings, and start all over again. So I try to be understanding and allow it to stay in towards the end of the job. But when that last ceiling cover go in, it has to come out, because you have to remove the nylon ceiling if it's in ceiling areas for air handling equipment and it's not suitable for that purpose and it's not listed, because in case of a fire, fumes can cause health risks such as respiratory problems, irritation of the eyes, nose, and throat. So that's an issue, but I do understand, and I try to allow it to stay in towards the very, very end of the job, but it does have to be removed. And you can find that in Article 300.22. Here we go. Let's go with cable tray. Cable tray that support electrical conductors shall be grounded as required for the conductor's enclosures in accordance with Article 250.96 and 300.92(7)(a). So what that means is if you have cable tray, because that's a form of supporting MC cables or any raceways for that matter, but if it's MC and it's metallic, you have to have that cable tray bonded. And that's the point of this article right here, because it has to be bonded to the electrical. It has to be bonded so that if you do have a short circuit or any type of ground fault, that it will clear. And that's the problem with the cable tray that I've had on a few of these large jobs, that they forget to bond it, or it's not in the specs to bond it. That's the article you need to reference. Another issue that I've had with the cable tray is that with the cable tray, now you can use cable tray for power cables, or you can use it for low voltage, or you can use it for both, as long as it has a divider in there, a beam clamp, or something, any type of supporting device, and run on the outside of that cable basket with a bridle ring or a J hook and support other low voltage cables. So just say the electrical contractor bought a cable tray, metallic cable tray to run the MC cables in, or to run their raceway. That's their cable tray. So they may not want anyone else in that basket, because they purchased it for that purpose and that listing only. They only want to run electrical cables in that cable tray. So you can't hop on that basket on the side and run your fire alarm or your data or your low voltage or speakers or anything. You can't. You can't put your routers on the bottom. You can't hang your strut off the bottom. You can't trapeze off of that cable tray basket. So I just want you to keep that in, take that in consideration, because that has been a problem on several jobs. Service loops. Service loops must be supported inside the J hook or the bridle ring. With that being said, there's times where I've come on a job, you have a service loop nicely wrapped, workmanlike manner, but they have it tie wrapped outside of the J hook or the bridle ring. That's what the support is for the loop to rest inside of that bridle ring or that J hook. Because if you have a tie wrap, and for whatever reason, if the tie wrap breaks, it's going to fall in the ceiling and just lay on top of the ceiling. So if it's resting inside of the bridle ring or the J hook, you don't have a problem. That's what it's designed for. So make sure you put your service loops inside the J hook or the bridle rings. Okay, that article is 300.11a. Motorized equipment installed above a suspended ceiling shall have disconnecting means. So some of the motorized equipment that's installed above a suspended ceiling would be hot water tanks, instant hots, HVAC equipment, projector screen motors. They have disconnecting plugs or switches, motorized shades and blinds, motorized doors and gates. I have that sometimes at the malls, like when, the gates at the malls. So that's a motorized door, or in some of the office buildings when they have the motorized doors or partitioner doors and sign circuit. So those are a few of the motorized equipments that are installed above the suspended ceilings, and a disconnecting means are required. So those articles you can find that in are articles 422.31, 430.102, and 440.14. You can find that for motorized equipment above a suspended ceiling. So MC cables, cable conduits, lighting equipment cannot be, I got it. So here's another one that I've had at stores, like at grocery stores or any single structure that has a corrugated sheet roofing deck, also known as roof pan decking. MC cables, conduits, or lighting, electrical equipment, or any electrical equipment cannot be located directly under the metal corrugated sheet roofing deck. Cannot. It shall not be supported. It shall be supported so that there is not less than 1.5 inches measured from the lowest surface of the roof. So keep that in mind when you're running your electrical systems on, like, a grocery store, or it doesn't have to be a grocery store, just a one floor structure. It could be retail stores. Just keep that in mind, that you have to have spacing between that corrugated roofing system and your electrical equipment. So when they start putting nails in the deck up on top of the roof, it can't hit any electrical equipment. Just keep that in mind for all of the contractors, because that's an issue. This is one that this is just for appearances. I don't know why, but people like to do this. The electrical equipment shall not be contaminated by any foreign materials such as paint, plaster, or cleaners. No spray painting the ceilings or the electrical equipment. They do that just for appearances, but you can't do that. So Article 110.12b. When I come out for a ceiling cover, what I see a lot of would be temporary lighting installed above the suspended ceiling, or the drywall ceiling for that matter. Now, if I'm coming out to give you a ceiling cover, you're supposed to have everything removed from above the ceiling cover, because I get that a lot. Well, we're going to take that down when you leave. No, I'm here now. You're calling for a ceiling cover. It should be removed. That's something that you need to take in consideration, that it needs to be removed before you call for the inspection, because you're calling to cover the ceiling. So the lighting should be energized at this point, that the temporary lighting should be removed. You can find temporary lighting in 590.3D. Last but not least, before the entire ceiling will be covered, every electrical contractor on the job must have a ceiling cover before the tiles can be installed, because we're there. It's time to cover the ceiling. When the ceiling, because a lot of the contractors, like the main electrical contractor, he's there, he's doing power. Sometimes he may have some low voltage, but his primary job is to do the power. So on these larger jobs, like I mentioned, they will hire 5 or 6 different electrical low voltage contractors. So the general contractor, they need to get together, figure out who's all the players on the job, get the inspections called in, and have them done, because once the ceiling tiles go in, it's not feasible for you to come back and expect somebody to take a few out and do a ceiling cover, or take a few out and install electrical cabling. Most of the time, the low voltage work would be awarded to subcontractors that are hired by the owners. So that's an issue, because the general needs to know who's on that job so that he can keep track of who all needs to have an inspection. Because once the ceiling's covered, that's what the goal is, to keep the job on track so that everybody can get a ceiling cover and get out of the ceiling and move to the next phase. So just remember, everybody needs to have their ceiling work installed before we cover. If you have any questions or comments, contact me on any of my social media pages, Facebook, Instagram, X, YouTube, under the moniker Ask the Lady Electrical Inspector. If you would like to add to this discussion or provide feedback, you can email me at asktheladyelectricalinspector@gmail.com with any questions or concerns. Thank you and good night.